Okay, let's just start with a number. 1.5 million. That's a huge number, right? Now, what if I told you that's how many things were launched into the sky all at once from one spot on a single day?
Because, well, that's exactly what happened. It was this massive, spectacular attempt to break a world record and really put a city on the map. But, this story, it isn't just about that ambition. It's about what happens next. It's about consequences.
So today, we're going to dig into something called Balloonfest '86. And this is a story about an event that started out as this really vibrant symbol of hope and somehow ended up as a pretty somber, cautionary tale. And that's really the big question we're asking here, isn't it? How did a celebration, a totally well-intentioned charity fundraiser, this huge moment of city pride, how did it all go so terribly and tragically wrong? All right, let's get into it. So, to really get what happened with Balloonfest, you got to picture Cleveland back in 1986. The city was, well, it was trying to shake off a pretty bad image. They really wanted to prove they were a world-class place. And to do that, they needed to do something big, something really spectacular that would completely change the story.
Yeah, at the time, Cleveland was dealing with what a lot of people called a pretty rough reputation. So what was their big idea? Well, just the year before, Disneyland had set the world record for the biggest balloon launch ever. So the folks running Cleveland thought, hey, beating that record, that's the perfect, high-profile way to rebrand ourselves.
And when I say this plan was big, I mean it was enormous. The United Way of Cleveland was leading the charge, and it took them 6 whole months of planning. Get this, they built a structure with a net that was the size of an entire city block. And they had thousands of volunteers working for hours and hours just to fill up all 1.5 million of those balloons. The whole city was behind this thing. But here's where things get complicated. While downtown Cleveland was just buzzing with all this excitement on September 27, 1986, something else was happening just a few miles away on Lake Erie. A totally different story was unfolding, and it all started with a storm that was gathering on the horizon. This part is just incredible. Really, you had these two completely separate timelines happening at the same time, and neither one knew about the other. So the night before the big event, a really nasty thunderstorm rolled through. And right before that storm hit, 2 fishermen had gone out on the lake. So by the morning of Balloonfest, their families had already reported them missing. Their boat had been found, empty, and the U.S. Coast Guard was already out there on a search and rescue mission.
Meanwhile, back in the city, the vibe was completely different. I mean, polar opposites. The storm from the night before was gone, so the event was a go. It was all about this huge spectacle, just pure city pride.
You had over 100,000 people crammed into Cleveland's public square. Just imagine that. Everyone just staring up at this gigantic net, waiting for this historic moment to happen. You can just feel it. The energy was absolutely electric. And then, it happened. The net opens. The broadcast announcer is just ecstatic. It was a moment of pure, absolute triumph. 1.5 million balloons just flooding the sky. Cleveland did it. They broke the world record. And for that one brief moment, it was this stunning, incredible success. But you know where this is going. That feeling of triumph, it didn't last long. Not at all. That beautiful spectacle was about to become a massive problem for the entire city. The very thing they were celebrating was literally about to come back and haunt them. You can almost hear the shift in tone in this eyewitness account, from surprise to real concern. The weather, which seemed fine that morning, was turning on them. A cold front was moving in, bringing rain, and the wind completely shifted. So those balloons, they weren't floating away. Nope, they were coming back.
And this, right here, was the critical mistake. The plan, the expectation, was that the helium balloons would go way up high, deflate slowly, and then just kind of drift back down harmlessly, scattered all over. But the reality? That incoming cold air and rain, it acted like a giant lid in the sky. It pushed all of those still inflated balloons right back down onto the city in these huge, dense swarms.
The result? Just immediate chaos. The balloons swarmed the nearby airport, forcing them to shut down the runways. They covered the streets, causing car accidents, forcing roads to close. It got so bad they actually had to bring in a bulldozer just to clear a path. The entire city was paralyzed by its own party. And this is where those two separate stories we were talking about just crash into each other with absolutely devastating results. All that chaos happening in the city, it was now spilling right out onto Lake Erie, smack in the middle of that active Coast Guard search and rescue mission. This quote from a Coast Guard official, it just says it all. Their search for those two missing fishermen was suddenly impossible. Just imagine it. The entire surface of the water was covered in bobbing balloons. How do you tell the difference between a balloon in a person's head or a life jacket? You can't. And this chart really puts the scale of the problem into perspective. The planners figured, okay, maybe 10% of the balloons might land on the lake, but in reality, an estimated 60% of all 1.5 million balloons came down right on top of their search area. It was, as they said, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. The timeline from here is just heartbreaking. On the 27th, the day of the launch, the search is basically stopped in its tracks. For 2 days, they can't effectively search. And so on the 29th, the Coast Guard has no choice but to call it off. And then a short time later, the bodies of the two fishermen washed ashore.
So in the aftermath, Cleveland had to deal with the legacy of its big record-breaking day. And it was this really bizarre mix of technical achievement and just this deep, profound regret.
And here's the final unbelievable irony of the whole thing. Balloonfest '86 actually made it into the 1988 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. So on paper, technically, they did it. They succeeded. But that was it. That was the first and last time it was ever in the book, because after what happened in Cleveland, Guinness completely retired the category. They made sure that no one would ever try to break this kind of record again. And really, that leaves us with a big question to think about. Cleveland's ambition was good, right? They wanted to rebrand their city with this incredible moment of joy. But in chasing that spectacle, they completely lost sight of the potential for disaster. It really makes you ask, when does ambition, that drive to do something grand, end up causing more harm than good?